Hi, everybody. We've been gone for a while. Like I said, working on our 9th go live of the year already. I can't believe it's the end of June. We're so proud to have been named this year's Partner Impact Award winner at Rock Live. That makes 3 out of the last 4 years winning that award. It's you guys are great clients and supporters. Those of you who share our love of and passion for Plex. Those of you that we're so delighted to share our knowledge with. We want to thank you for your support and to Plex for making such a great product that we believe in so much, but mostly the dedicated team at Control+M. So hats off to all of you. So today we're going to talk about job operation start dates, including why they matter, difference between finite scheduling and infinite scheduling, how Plex typically schedules jobs, the big impact that workcenter calendar has on it, a couple different pros and cons of different scheduling methods. I'm going to show you something you may not have seen before, which is the calendar-enabled job dispatch, and talk about a few creative approaches and get your thoughts on the next session we got to discuss. So let's begin. In case you weren't aware, in addition to implementations, we've done a lot of optimization work coming in to help folks who are already live understand and use Plex better. And we work with a lot of clients who are confused about how job operation scheduling works. So I decided to put this presentation out so everyone could understand it. And the fact that you may not understand it could happen for a lot of reasons. There might be some turnover from the original implementation team. You could have been overwhelmed from drinking from the fire hose during implementation, or maybe implementation was just too long ago and you just don't remember. And some challenges that we've seen that clients have asked us to address are a lack of faith in job operation start dates because they don't understand where they came from. Sometimes large job quantities are pushing in raw materials earlier than they might really be needed. And frequent customer release changes sometimes make keeping up with job operation start dates a little challenging. So we figure the more that you know, the better you'll be able to manage your system. So let's talk about why job operation start dates matter. When we come in for an optimization, one of the first things we're going to ask you is if you have comfort in those job op start dates. The reason we ask this is MRP is going to drive materials in based on that job demand. So to be in on time for the job operation start date that will consume the raw materials. So if you have raw materials at op20, MRP wants to know when op20 is going to start, so it knows when to have you buy those materials. So if your job operation start dates are calculating too late, your material is going to come in too late, and it's going to constantly stress your manufacturing floor. And if the start dates are calculating too early, then you might be buying too soon and slowing down your inventory turnovers. If inventory turnover or inventory terms is a new term for you, inventory turns is a new term for you, the most simplistic explanation of this is that it's a measure of how long it takes you to convert raw materials into sales. There's no one correct turn number. In fact, benchmarks are typically set by industry, and they've got a little bit out of hand in this tight supply chain reality. Accountants, along with people who care about space on the manufacturing and warehouse floor, really care about that measurement. In addition, incorrect job op start dates can negatively impact your capacity plan. And that means that you might be missing opportunities to fill up your capacity and use it to your best advantage, or it might be leading you to make promise dates that you can't really meet. So if we can get job operation start dates working in the way that you need them to work into, you're going to get closer to on-time inventory requirements and accurate capacity planning. And that gives you a much better opportunity to achieve your production schedule. So before we get too much further, we're going to be focusing on infinite scheduling today. So let's talk about the difference between finite scheduling and infinite scheduling. For most Plex users, you use what's called infinite scheduling. It's what's shipped with Plex. It's the standard Plex methodology. It means that Plex assumes that a work center can output well over 24 hours a day, and it relies on human intervention to move jobs around to create an achievable schedule. Now, you might ask yourself, why would anybody use infinite scheduling? Well, First of all, most people have a very high amount of institutional knowledge in their plan of how things work together, what tooling works best right after another, what's the shortest setup time between metals. And sometimes it's difficult to get those ideas out of someone's head and into a system. So infinite scheduling comes free with Plex. Many people are quite successful and use it all the time. And very few people love to change, so they avoid finite scheduling. Switching to finite scheduling requires both discipline and accurate data. But many companies don't have good data or good discipline yet, so that can make that conversion a little difficult. And while infinite works really well when it's managed, it can represent risk sometimes. So for example, I worked at a company who had a scheduler who, if they take a week off, it means the schedule is frozen because only that person knows how to use it. There's no opportunities for drop-ins. I also worked at a company where the scheduling team just couldn't let go of their institutional knowledge. They just were not able to get the information out of their brain and onto a flow chart to switch to finite. So they went back to infinite scheduling, and it works pretty well. So if you can't trust your data or your user discipline, then your best option is to use infinite scheduling until you get that cleared up. Infinite scheduling is an excellent first step in the scheduling process, and candidly, most customers use this until they're pretty well stabilized. For those of you who do use finite scheduling, job operation start dates are important, and yes, some of these options might help you, but in general, your finite scheduler is going to use many other variables to calculate job op start dates, so some of these will not necessarily be valid. So again, we're going to be focusing on infinite scheduling. If you want to learn more about the finite scheduler, throw something out in the chat. We have a couple of folks on staff who are well versed in finite, and we could do a control and present on this topic if you're interested. So either throw it in the chat or email jill@control.m.solutions. The general process within Plex that calculates job operation start dates begins with the process routing data, which Plex really relies on to be accurate for more than just job start dates, also for capacity planning and for costing. So on this slide, I've got a list of all the fields and screens that can impact your job due date, which then drives job operation start dates. And remember, even if you can't see the fields in your configuration, maybe they might be hidden by settings. If there's data in there and the settings are in place, they might be impacting your schedule. So just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. If your job start dates are not calculating the way that you expect that they should, consider checking in all of these data points. And we'll talk about them in a little bit more detail in the upcoming slides. So our currently scheduled option takes the current job due date, and it can subtract things like transport lead time, shipping calendar, and finished goods buffer. Let's say that you're a company working in the US and you're shipping to Mexico. July 4th is a holiday in the US, and most companies don't ship on that date. So if the customer in Mexico wants a shipment to go out on July 4th, Plex is going to tell you to go out on July 1st with the shipping calendars. There are some other factors to consider as well. Transport lead time, which means how long it takes a shipment to arrive at the destination. If your customer requires a shipment to arrive on July 11th and it takes 3 days to get there, you can have the ship date calculate 3 days earlier than the customer due date using that transport lead time. In addition, there's a field on the part record called finished goods buffer that can push the job finish date back. This is a cool feature that can negatively impact inventory turns, which means your accountants might not love it, but it can really be great to reduce stress on your shipping department. It basically says, by part, tell me how many days before the release is due to ship that you want the parts to be manufactured. So those parts will be theoretically ready and in shipping when it's time to pack them. So once we have the actual due date of the job calculated from the shipping date, then Plex takes your job quantity, divides it by the pieces per hour on the routing, and adds setup to calculate the amount of hours required by the operation at the work center. It then applies that to the work center calendar, and that'll tell you how many hours and days of capacity you'll need. And it'll apply that towards working days backwards to get to the job operation start date. Subcontract updates are calculated similar to internal routing dates, but they basically assume 24 hours a day times the days at the subcon op on the routing. For example, if you have a 5-day subcon operation, Plex is going to show that it's 120 hours because it's not managing the subcontractor capacity. One of the biggest impacts on the schedule is the workcenter calendar. In finite scheduling, changes to the calendar are effectively respected in real time because one of the considerations in the finite scheduler is the workcenter calendar. But in infinite scheduling, today's focus, the workcenter calendar is reviewed at the time of job creation and reschedule only. So it's really good to be in front of that. Get that workcenter calendar accurate as quickly as you know about potential changes. If you know about your fall holidays now, they should already be blocked in your workcenter calendar today. And that workcenter calendar is comprised of 2 parts, days and shifts, and both impact the schedule equally. Updating your days off is just as important as whether or not the right shifts are associated for each workcenter. To best illustrate how the workcenter calendar can impact job op start dates, I set up a single part operation and created a job. The routing has a setup of 1 hour, and then it can run 1,000 pieces per hour. So theoretically, a 30,000 piece job should take about 31 hours, 1 hour setup plus 30 hours of runtime. Pretty simple. And to keep along that simple train, we're going to ignore our shipping calendars, transport lead time, and finished goods buffer. We're going to pretend none of those exist. We're going to apply that 31-hour job requirement to 2 different shifts. First, our workcenter is going to have a first shift only, and then we're going to change over to 2 shifts. Our first shift is 7 to 3, and the second is 3 to 11. No lunch, no breaks. And while I realize this is not a real situation, it does make the math a little simpler to calculate. So if your shifts and calculations might be a little bit more difficult to calculate, depending on workcenter setup, you might have breaks and lunches that reduce your workcenter's ability to produce parts. Other companies leave the workcenters running during lunches and cover with a smaller crew. So given this level of possible complexity, I wanted to keep your initial view out here very, very simple. So we're going to start our first job with a workcenter that has a single shift, and we're going to make it due September 7th, which will be impacted by the United States Labor Day. If you want to know how to put these overrides into a calendar, look at our YouTube presentation called Getting Your PCNs Ready for Next Year. I know it's only June, but you can't do that too early. And I'm gonna cover a little bit about how to do this later on if time allows. But I do go pretty deep into it in that Getting Your PCN Ready for Next Year session. Honestly, this is my favorite view of workcenter shifts because it sort of paints a nice picture. You can see on here there's a thin green bar that's approximately 1/3 the width of the date. So you can see how this is working in one shift. You can see the holiday in the workcenter calendar is blocked off for the 5th, and it looks like I actually went about an hour into first shift on Sunday. I'm sorry, on Tuesday. So that's going to impact us by about 1 hour in a couple different places. So as you can see, if we schedule our 31-hour job to be due September 7th, the system's going to reverse calculate the 31 hours we need, which turns out to be 3.875 8-hour days. And given that one of those days is a holiday, in order to be complete by September 7th, we have to start the morning of August 31st. So our 31 hours has 8 hours on the 31st, 8 on the 1st, which is 16, 8 more hours on the 2nd of September, which equals 24. We're off on September 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Then the remaining hours on September 6th, excuse me, then the remaining hours on September 6th are going to have the rest of our production to finish by September 7th. Now let's see what happens when we have 2 shifts on our work center. You'll note that we're still off on Labor Day in the US. And see how the work center calendar looks different? Now we have 2 of these columns, so we have 2 shifts showing on each day. So we're going to change these shifts, and then I'm going to go in and reschedule my job, and we're going to see what happens. Just remember this, just adding a shift won't change the job. You need to reschedule it manually. And because I care about all of you enough not to actually make you sit through my internet connection in case it goes haywire, it's all screenshots today. You can see now the same job, the same quantity, and the same due date, our job can now start on 9/2. The same 31 hours is fewer than 2 16-hour days. So we can start this job on Friday, September 2nd, which is 16 hours. We're off the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and then we finish it on the 6th, ready to ship on the 7th. So if you're not updating your work center calendar by associating off times, additional times, and keeping the shifts accurate, why not? I'm going to ask you a tough question. What is stopping you? And what are you getting out of that that's more valuable than having an accurate schedule? If time allows, at the end of this presentation, I'll show you how to change shifts on work centers and block out dates if needed. And note, when you're working with the work center calendar, you can add extra time as well as reduced time. And you can hit all work centers of a group, a type, or building at one time. Now, remember, with infinite scheduling, and I can't stress this enough, that doesn't reschedule jobs. You have to do that manually. It's not that difficult. And I think Heidi, who's on the call today, actually put something in the community about an idea for a mass jobs reschedule button. If you want that, let me know an email or the chat, and we'll find the ideation and send it to you. So it's not critical to keep this work center calendar up daily. So let's say that your capacity this week shows 110%. Well, you can probably just work on Saturday and you'll be okay. It's not really worth it to do it daily or even weekly. But if you know in advance when you're going to need it, then change the calendar. For example, we have a client who does a lot of work for Harley Davidson, who, back when we were doing before COVID, they were pushing their supply chain really hard in January, February, and March. So my client always planned to work overtime the first 3 months of the year. So they would go into their work center calendar and add those Saturdays to every single week. If that schedule's planned and Plex is told about it, then the system will handle it better than if you just ignore it. And what do I always say? Plex is like your mother. If you lie to her, she's going to know, and you're going to pay the price. And yes, a lie of omission is still a lie. So not telling Plex about extra time or reduced time is gonna work against you in the long run. So now that we've driven home the impact of the work center calendar and shift association on your job operations, let's talk about some ways we can schedule that can materially impact your job operation start date. We're going to use the same construct for the conversation, but with a different part and a different impact. I made this one a little bit more complex. It has 3 steps. And for simplicity on this one, we're going to assume there are 0 days off. And yes, I know this is fantasy, but when you're learning, I find the fewer complications are better until you're good at the basics. Once you learn the basics, then let's layer in the complexities of days off or breaks and lunch times in shifts. So for our new part, each routing step has the same 1-hour setup and 1,000 pieces per hour. And for this example, all work centers are going to be first shift only. Again, we want to keep it simple, no holidays, 1 shift. And we're going to look at 4 different scheduling methods, starting with reinforcing the one that we just went through. Now, I'm not here to recommend any one of these methods over another. I just want to teach you what is available so that you can know how your system is behaving or how it could behave. And if you're struggling, you can use some of this information to help troubleshoot. Selecting a scheduling method really needs to be discussed by your material planning group, your operations group, and your shipping. This is not a decision to be made in a vacuum. We need lots of people in here. We're going to talk about current methods, operation start date alignments, lead time, and basic scheduling parameters. For each one of these options, I'm going to show you the same screenshots of each one so you can see the impact on it when the job has been rescheduled. And like I said, I'm doing screenshots because I want to keep the meeting flowing. I don't want you to have to suffer in case my internet gets slow. So here's our process routing. You can clearly see there's 3 operations. Each one has a 1-hour setup and runs 1,000 pieces per hour. And each one also has an expensive BOM item. And that's what's going to be driven in at each of the start dates. If these BOM items really are expensive components, controlling when they come in can impact your cash flow. Our current process is just like what we talked about earlier. An 81-hour job operation will take about 10 days to produce. So if we need to be done by the 31st, we have to start July 19th. Imagine our first operation starts July 19th at midnight and finishes August 2nd. That's about 10 business days later. You can continue the calculations forward to see how it's about 2 weeks between each operation. This is a great option. In fact, the most frequently used option because it leverages the power of the workcenter calendars and shifts, and it does all of that really well. But again, if you're using the infinite scheduler, it assumes infinite capacity and it can't do any overlaps or delays. So each job is carefully calculated for start dates, but it doesn't take other jobs or overlaps into consideration. If you have a very big job run and the first operation takes, say, 10 days to produce 20 totes, but you can start the second op once you have 4 totes the first op done, you're going to have to manage that manually. And many people do just that really successfully. A few ways to do that would be to manually change the job op start date, or you could technically split the job, which we're going to talk about in one of our last slides. So here's how things look on the job dispatch. It's pretty straightforward. Now note these are not an operation sequence number, so operation 10 is at the bottom. So sometimes people want operation 10 to be at the top, but these are in alphabetical order of the work center. It's just a different view of what we just saw, different format. All the data are the same, but I want to include it because if you're more accustomed to looking at the dispatch list, you want to see what that looks like. You can see here we're going to consume 81 hours of capacity, and they're pretty straightforward. So there's a Plex setting called all operations start the same date. I used to refer to this as shotgun scheduling, but in Plex, that terminology means something a little bit different. In Plex, shotgun scheduling means scheduling an operation to all work centers instead of just the top one. In this case, I have a tendency to use the term shotgun like a shotgun start at a race, meaning everything starts on the same date and time. So if I slip and call this shotgun scheduling, please remember that what I mean is really starting everything on the same date and time. Candidly, I don't understand why anybody would want to use this. I'm super open to ideas why someone would want this, but it's there, right? I might not recommend it for you, but if your system is doing this and you don't like it, now you might know why. So if we turn on the settings of earliest start date and all job ops start the same date, we can essentially work on packaging a job before it's even assembled. Now, look, there's a million different factory configurations out there, and just because I don't understand why someone would use this doesn't mean it isn't used. In fact, if you understand the history of Plex development, you know that somebody somewhere actually paid for this to be developed. So someone's using it. I just don't know why. So in this case, I set our earliest start date to be 7/25. That means all 3 of our expensive components will come in on 7/25, but the op due dates are very different. And I might be able to save myself some money, some cash flow by pushing those expensive components out for downstream operations a little bit later. So again, this is about driving your material due dates. If your material's all being due on the same date, you might want to see if you've got this configuration set up in your system. And again, on the job dispatch list, it's not much new information, but the scheduled start dates again are exactly the same. So it could be somewhat misleading for your packaging person who thinks that they need to start this operation on 7/25 at the same time that the assemble operation is started. Okay, next method. There is another option that can be used that's more about time than quantity. And this is great for things like painting or curing or baking if that's the majority of your work. It's called lead time schedule. We enable a field on the process routing called lead time days. And then once you turn that on, you can teach the system to use lead time instead of routings. The thing to ask routing rates, the things to ask yourself is, will this work for all of my operations? With finite scheduling, you can schedule operations differently, but remember this presentation is about infinite scheduling, which has fewer options for job start calcs. So anyway, if your manufacturing is more time reliant than quantity, sintering, painting, curing, etc., this might be a method for you. It essentially takes the same methodology that's used for subcontracting and it applies it to internal work center. So in this case, instead of requiring 81 hours, we have a 14-day lead time added to the routing. Now, remember, if your scheduling engine is somehow giving you results that you don't understand, enable this field and see if there's data in there. Just because a field isn't turned on doesn't mean it's blank, and that doesn't mean that Plex can't see it. In fact, I know there's one person on this call who has actually got some interesting things going on in their PCN where they're doubling up the lead time. So quick question, lead time is always confusing. Are these business days or calendar days? Maria, great question. I will tell you that it can be configured to work in different ways in different modules. So hit me up one-on-one after this, and I'll help you out in your PCN. What I did to show this in our routing is I've added 10 days on the first op, 12 on the second, and 14 on the third, which is what you're seeing here. So let's see what it does to our job. Note the difference here between scheduled hours and elapsed hours. So the column that says hours here on my first row, in the first operation, I have 10 days lead time. And that's 7/12 to 7/26. That's 10 business days. And it takes 240 hours per day because it doesn't care about the work center. I'm sorry, 24 hours per day because it doesn't care about the shifts on there. We're not telling it ignore shifts, just worry about days. So in this case, it's 10 days lead time is 10 business days. And remember on the last screen, I set my third operation of a 14-day lead time. The hours required are 14 times 24, which equals 336. Start and stop days are independent of the job quantity. Now, this can be a dangerous method to use if you don't have a grasp on the difference in your configuration between calendar and business days. So make sure you test carefully. This is not a bad option for people who do jobs of one all the time. So if you are a make to order company, this might work well for you. And here's the dispatch list. You can see the run hours are obviously incorrect, but it is an option, and it might explain why your system is behaving this way if you're doing this and you didn't know why. The capacity looks really different in this case. Other jobs had a runtime capacity of 81 hours. This now shows nearly 3 times that on the dispatch list. So we've covered a few basic options, and they're pretty clear and simple, and most are pretty useful. But one thing I see when I visit customers is users who have not implemented finite scheduling, enabling basic scheduling parameters in their system and expecting them to work, being surprised that they don't do any good. Now, I understand why people do this. If I were hacking through documentation screens and settings, I might try the same thing. Hey, here's some that looks useful. Let's give it a try. But if it doesn't do what you want it to do because it requires something else, it requires finite scheduling in many cases, but there are ways to use some of these fields. Let's talk about something that's out there, but it's often misunderstood that can be used for good, and that's the basic scheduling parameters on your process routing. Let's talk about how they might assist you in infinite scheduling or why they're making you crazy about how your jobs are not being scheduled the way that you want to. I apologize for not being a little bit more clear with arrows on this slide, but remember this option clearly states that it does not respect calendars. And for me, that's a huge loss. But if you work 7/24, then this is really great. I mean, if you can do that with holiday exceptions, of course. And with Plex, there are millions of combinations of setting. And I have had more than one client tell me that even though it says it doesn't work with calendars, they've made it work. With millions of ways to configure Plex, that doesn't surprise me at all. But in my PCN, it's working the way that Plex says it's documented. So I set up some basic scheduling parameters. In this case, we have to wait a delay after 8 hours on the first operation, which is on the left. You can see it's just past the little eye, the little dark eye. And the same line on the right-hand side, we've got a delay after of -6 hours. So in this case, I can start op 30 6 hours before op 20 is complete because I know that I can do this in infinite scheduling. I can actually start earlier. So let's see what it looks like. Remember our first option had the job scheduled to start 7/19. Well, this one can start 8/20. Now that's the impact of losing the calendar and shifts. And in this case, it is huge. We can now start the 20th of August, but that doesn't really seem real, does it? And that's because it's assuming a 24-hour day. And yes, there are ways around this, but that could be a session in itself. So let's look at the details. The first operation, the start date is 8:20 at 1 p.m. That leaves 11 hours left on the 20th because we have a 24-hour day. We're ignoring calendars and we're ignoring shifts. 72 hours later is 3 more days. So 72 of the 3 days plus 11 is 83 hours. That gets us to midnight on the 23rd. And we need to get to 89, not the normal 81 hours, because we added 8 more hours. So we pick up those 6 hours left on the operation. That gets us to a 6 a.m. start operation on the 24th for the next operation. It is an interesting option, but how useful is it? I'm not bringing this up necessarily as a best practice. It's really more a warning. I've seen people turn these basic scheduling parameters on and then get frustrated that it doesn't do what they want it to do. Those fields were initially put in there for the finite scheduling system. So expecting them to give you finite scheduling without doing all the work is a pretty big ask. And it does need some testing. So if this is happening in your system, it might explain some otherwise inexplicable results. So I'm going to slip back one slide here. Remember, if you're seeing these scheduling operations on your routing, then they may or may not be working the way you need to because of settings. If you don't see them and you're still seeing some wacky delays or overlaps, turn them on and see if there's data in there. So, oops, I'm sorry, I got a little excited here. Here's the job dispatch, in case it's your favorite view. In this case, it might seem a little bit more clear, or it could be so wacky that nobody understands it, nobody trusts it, and then they build a spreadsheet to plan. And people who own Plex and do their planning on a spreadsheet makes me sad. If there's one thing I could make it go away, it would be Plex schedulers who use spreadsheets. I'd love to give you a redo of our presentation, Learning to Love MRP and PRP, so you can avoid those spreadsheets. If you were interested in that, throw that in the chat. We're always looking for folks to give us good ideas for content for these sessions. So let's chat a little bit about some cool tools and potential ideas that you can leverage for scheduling. They're a little bit off the beaten track and worth a conversation to have. There isn't a day that I don't find some hidden nugget in Plex, some cool I didn't know about. I feel like I find something new every day, and that's kind of fun. Plex has a pretty cool screen out there that I will show in the next slide called Calendar Enabled Dispatch. It was originally hailed as Finite Light back in 2008, and it's something that you probably all own, you just don't know it. In UX, you can enable it by going to Reports, and in Classic, go to Vision Plex Screen List. I can show you at the end of the presentation if you'd like, but in essence, what it says is this. Starting right now, which is when you run the report, we can start the second job in our sequence when the first one is done. So now, plus remaining runtime of the first job equals the end time of the first job, and that's the start time of the second job. It doesn't have quite as many bells and whistles as regular dispatch, but it is pretty cool. It can't take into account any time not defined in the setup or the workcenter calendar, and it assumes 100% efficiency of routing data, which also could be a session in itself. We want to make sure that we don't double or even triple count inefficiencies, but it is a pretty cool and useful screen. I like to suggest this for customer support people, gosh, I can't think of the term, customer service people in manufacturing, to say, when is my job likely to be done? This calendar enabled dispatch list basically says that if the operations team runs to schedule, this is when a job will be done. So this is what the report looks like. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you can see under the scheduled operation, the operation start is June 26th at 5:53 a.m. That is the point that I ran this report. So you can see that my job operation was due on June 3rd, my job is originally due on June 3rd. I'm using a finite schedule here, so the system has pushed my dates around. And I can't finish this because I have 17 hours and 43 minutes left of production, which means I'm going to actually finish this job. The calculated finish date will be 6/27 at 7:36 a.m. And the calculated finish date for the first job on the list becomes the start date for the next job on the list. So this takes job sequencing, applies it to the workcenter calendar, and tells you the likelihood of the finish time of the next job. There's a lot of red on here, and that's because this is a test PCN. Hopefully yours doesn't look that bad. For example, it looks to me like I should have had some jobs done here in 2021. And job priority has some interesting things on here. At least one of you will recognize this as being your calendar enabled dispatch. You probably might want to clean out jobs that are due from 2021 because they may not be done, or you might want to just tell Plex a little bit more about the actual job itself, saying, hey, look, maybe we're going to push this out till August. I always get a question about this open idle hours off to the right. If those are negative, that means your job operation is likely to finish after the op was due. But if it's positive, it means you could slip some things in there without impacting the schedule. So for example, if I wanted to, I've got some time in between these jobs. If I wanted to move a 3-hour job in there, I could. Couple things to consider. There is an update schedule dates button on here, and it's very powerful. And by powerful, I mean dangerous. If your actual start date is beyond the due date of the jobs, then you're going to have operations starting and ending out of sequence. So for this reason, I like to roll this out without those buttons on. Let's go back to the slide before this. If I did that update dates button, this would, for example, say on the job that I've got a job due date of April 22nd, 2021, where my first operation is not going to finish till 6/29. And while that might be the case, we really should change those job updates to be accurate. So you could have a job with a due date of June 15th with a downstream op that maybe is supposed to be due June 11th. But if you use that update dates button, it might say the first operation is not going to be done till the 26th, long after the job is due. So the only way to really be accurate about this is to go into the job itself, to change the job due date and hit reschedule. So this screen, the calendar enabled dispatch list, only updates job op start dates, not job dates. So be careful about that. Again, let the system recalculate backwards from a job op due date, and let that reschedule button will reverse changes in case you accidentally make some. The scary thing about this button is you could check all and hit that update and really make a whale of a mess. So I like to take that button away from people because I feel like it is a little bit dangerous. One interesting idea we've seen is called a scheduling work center, which is a work center that nobody logs into and jobs are sent there first. So here's the business case. I worked with a client who had 13 laser burning work centers, and they all do the same thing, and they all have the same capabilities. And the daily schedule was made up a few days in advance. These guys could never tell what laser things were going to run on in advance, so forcing it to one would almost always be wrong. My suggestion to them at first was that they put laser 1 first on the routing for every part, and then just move the jobs one by one. But their scheduler, who's called Curtis, said to me, hey, look, this means I'll never really know what the schedule should look like for laser 1. If they're all wrong, let's create a fake work center called the laser planning work center, and put that first on the routing. That way, every job will get scheduled to the laser planner, and my job becomes keeping that laser planner dispatch list clean. Now, all I have to do is look at that scheduling work center and move the jobs off of there. Any jobs in that work center need to be scheduled because nothing should ever be there. And that way I can balance the capacity plan pretty easily. At first, I thought he was crazy, but then I realized how smart it was. And we now have multiple clients who do this. Now, note it doesn't work well with batching or cell operations, but almost everything else works pretty well. As long as you're careful and you're not doing finite scheduling, you are okay. If you're using finite, do not do this. In fact, I can't recommend it against it any more strongly. But if you're using infinite scheduling, just create a separate work center and cost it the same as all the other work centers on the routing. Now, for our business case, we had 13 machines that all worked the same and cost the same. It was pretty easy. Where you have different routing rates, you may want to have something blended in there. So consider your costing impacts before you do this. Like I said, in the case where the first client I handled this way, everything ran at the same speed, so it was pretty easy. If your rates are not the same, talk to your accountant about what they want in there for rates so that costing is not negatively impacted. For capacity, once we move off the planner onto the actual work center it's going to be on, the jobs will actually recalculate their times. So consideration, costing, and rates Also, I like to put these in a separate work center group. So imagine if we had 13 laser burning machines and all of them were at 100% capacity, I would have 1,300% utilization on my planner and 100 at each of the work centers themselves. So remember that if I had actually put that laser planner in the same bucket, Plex would think I had 14 laser work centers to measure capacity against. So set it up as a separate group. There's a few final helpful tools we can tell you about that might help. So let's run through those and see what you can do to get a little bit better in scheduling. If you were in a manufacturing situation where you make a lot of parts at Op 10, but then they get split up, you might want to consider job splits. Let's say, for example, that you're going to make 100,000 widgets, but then we're going to break them down into smaller jobs for different colors of widgets. And all the subsequent colors can start the same date, which is right after the operation is done. Or maybe one color could start producing right after the first 20,000 widgets are done. So for this consider job splits. So your first operation your job would be for 100,000 pieces, get the first operation done, split those remaining operations into 5 different jobs. So general rule of thumb, if you can produce 100,000 parts in 5 days, but you can do 5 different colors of those parts in 1 day, all at the same time, then you're going to want to consider splitting. Another great consideration is job templates. Besides BOM substitutions, if you have a frequently used different set of steps or an alternate routing for a part, you can set up a job template. That'll pull in the idiosyncrasies of the job and control operation start dates with those unique details. So let's say, for example, you typically heat treat internally, but sometimes you have to go to use outside services. You can create a template for inside as well as outside heat treat, and each is going to be calculated on their own without having to make the change from inside to outside per job. If you want to know how to do that, let me know. If you don't know how to do internal, external processing on the same routing, or if you want to make job sheets or job templates, let me know. And we can do a control and presents on it. And remember, alternates to the normal routing are always going to have costing issues. So keep your accountant in mind. There are a couple of mass update screens for jobs. Job mass cancel, which is super useful at go live. Job bulk update or job mass update, which are in job mass updates classic only. Job bulk is in UX only. They work a little differently, but if you're coming to these sessions, you probably already advanced enough to know that I'll advise you to test them before looking at them and seeing if they work for you. So, all right, lots of good material covered today. I want to remind everyone that you're on mute. See if anyone's got any questions. Besides, so Maria asked, the lead time's always confusing if they're business or calendar. So Maria, hit me up. We'll talk about that. Heidi has got the mass reschedule link on here. Henry, can I send you the presentation? I'm actually going to put the recording on YouTube, but if you email me directly, Henry, I will be happy to send you a copy of this. Anyone else wants a copy, just email me directly. Whoops, maybe I should get this out from under my email. Okay, so Brianna asked about a part buffer delay. I'm going to tell you that I'm going to bring Plex up here. Hold on just a minute. Can we overlap schedule subcomponents? Tammy, would you mind taking yourself off mute and we can talk about that? Not really sure I understand what you mean.
We have an issue where we actually make subparts in Plex. And so because it ran on a different side of the plant, so we have stamping and we have an assembly area.
Okay.
So we have an issue where we obviously you have to create the job first for the subcomponents or for the subcomponent on the value add side, because that's the finished part. And then that trickles down to the stamping side job. And we're having issues where it's causing us to need to start the job on the stamping side sooner than we really need it.
So you can actually start the second op before the first one's completely finished, and it's a separate part number?
we have it set up as a separate part number because it's being done on, so we split it because we do bulk production on the stamping side. And then they do piece production on the value add side.
Okay.
So they're two separate parts that we have. And so when we schedule the part for the stuff on the value add side, it's saying that we basically need to run parts before we really need to on our stamping side. And so it's causing production some concerns.
I think you probably would be a good candidate for finite scheduling. Tammy, why don't you email me directly, and we'll have a quick no charge chat just to make sure that I get a full grasp of this. And you might be a good candidate for finite scheduling. So, Brianne, back to your question. Here's the finished goods part buffer. It's on the planning and scheduling portion of the part information. If you're in Classic, it's still in the same place. I think the setting's called finished good part buffer use. And this one basically says, if there's a finished good part buffer of 3 days, 3 days before it's scheduled to ship, I want the job to be completed. I did that at my first company when I was a Plex customer, and my accountant darn near choked me because she did not think that was a very good, it drove our inventory turns pretty wacky. So she did not love that. So your comment, I see we don't have that turned on, just a reminder, just because it's not turned on doesn't mean there's not data there. So all right, I wanted to advise everyone that we're going to do another session on 7/13, and we had actually planned on doing it on supplier price unit conversions, but Veronica reminded me this week that July 25th is the cutoff for converting to IAM. So if you haven't converted, you're going to need to by then. We are going to offer a session in 2 weeks if there's enough interest. We did some research, and about 20% of our clients have not switched over to IAM. If you don't know if you don't know how to tell if you're migrated, I'll show you in the next slide, because they're going to finish this by July 25th. So that means everyone's going to have to use IAM, identity and access management, by that date. Another option is going to be supplier price unit conversion. So if you buy in dozens or inventory in each, you can either share your thoughts on the chat or with Jill, and she can help us determine the next session. My gut tells me that even though only 20% of the community might be interested, we're probably going to do IAM just because it's a very big impactful. So watch our LinkedIn page for polls, and please check out our YouTube channel and subscribe and like. Just like everyone else, we kind of live on those kudos. I think we're up to 230 subscribers, so kind of feeling like a Kardashian here. It's pretty awesome. We're shooting for 20 go lives this year, so I'm glad we have the time to sneak this in. And while I'm going through the user manager, if you're already switched to IAM, this will be boring for you. Thank you for your time. If you want to stick around, here's how to tell if you're migrated. In Classic, go to User Manager, click IAM Accounts, and if you click Search here, you'll see a column that says Migration Status Migrated. If nobody shows up here, you have not migrated yet. You're going to want to talk to IT. And UX, it's a little easier because it shows right on the main page if you're migrated. So hopefully everyone is ready for that big change the 25th. I want to thank everyone for coming, and we should have the recording out later this afternoon. Thanks, everybody.